welcome in. Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Got a pretty interesting show for you here today. Going to talk some Dwight Howard, Nikola Jokic, Superman versus the Joker. Interesting comments. But before we get to that, you know what time it is. If you haven't already and you're here on YouTube, please go ahead, click that subscribe, that like, and that notification bell so you can be kept up to date whenever new content drops on the channel. If you want the audio-only version of the podcast, please open up your audio podcast platform, hit the search bar, type in the Format Podcast, do a search. We should come up. Make sure you share the pod with people you know that love sports talk, that might want to hear a different voice and a different take on the stories of the day. Make sure that you give us that 5-star review if you enjoy the content. And when you do these things, you know what continues to happen. You help us find more sports fans and helps more sports fans find us. Now let's get right to it. Okay, so Nikola Jokic, newly minted NBA champion, NBA Finals MVP. He's kind of, he's the darling of the basketball world right now. Well, I guess him and Victor Wembanyama, but that's a different story. But yeah, Jokic is kind of, he's the cat's meow right now, or whatever analogy you want to use. He is, and quick note, it's interesting how it seems like every year, whoever is the best player in the NBA Finals kind of gets automatically jumped to best player in the world. I'm not sure when that happened, but it seems like the last few years that's kind of been the way things have gone. But I don't know, whatever. Anyway, that's just something to take note of. But yeah, Jokic is kind of regarded by a lot of people now as the best player in the world. I still don't think he's better than Giannis. Not sure he's the best in the world. Like I said, I don't think he's better than Giannis, but he is a heck of a player, and he's earned a great deal of the due that he is reserved. But when it comes to due that he is deserving of, Dwight Howard, former multiple-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year, former dominant center, probably future Hall of Famer, and a guy who is just, he, for his era, was arguably the best center in the game. He made some very interesting comments. He was interviewed by Complex, and the article was released last Thursday. And we'll check this out. This is interesting. I'm gonna read the comments to you. Dwight Howard says, quote, "Obviously, people are going to say Jokic can score. He got all these offensive skills. But at the same time, I was getting 38 points and 20 rebounds, 45 and 18, 19, 20. And I'm doing all this with twos," Howard said. "No threes, all twos. I'm doing this with lobs. I'm not getting a lot of post-up attempts like Jokic. He's getting way more opportunities, I would say, as far as to show his low post game and all that stuff. And I was just in a different era," unquote. Now, that's interesting because there's a lot of truth to what he's saying, but I guess this is maybe one of those situations where even though what you're saying is true, it's kind of incomplete. Now, full disclosure, I was never a huge Dwight Howard fan, but this is kind of one of those situations where I guess when you step back and observe things after some time, after you've kind of had the opportunity to get distance from it, maybe your viewpoints on it kind of change. I was never a huge Dwight Howard fan because I was always of the mindset that he dominated an extremely weak big man era. I'm really having a hard time thinking of another truly elite big who was playing in his era. Yeah, that's a really tough one, at least during the time when he was in his prime, right? So Dwight Howard is, he's making these comments and a lot of people think that he's crazy, but let's try this. Before we get into it and I give you my thoughts on it, let's go ahead and listen to what Stephen A. Smith had to say about Dwight Howard's comments.
Stay off the weed. Dwight Howard. I'm not accusing him of using weed, although it's legal in many states in this day and age. I'm simply using that metaphorically to make my point. Dwight Howard, stop. Stop, bro. And you're talking to a Dwight Howard fan. Mm-hmm. Dwight Howard, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, was definitely 5-time All-Defensive Team, champion in 2020, 2-time NBA blocks champion, okay, 5-time rebounding champion. No shade on Dwight Howard in terms of how legitimate of a bona fide player and star that he was, okay? But that was defensively, with blocking shots and rebounding. To say that you couldn't shine Jokic's shoes as an offensive player would be an insult to Jokic. It's worse than that. You weren't in his class. You had no post game. okay? You had a jump hook. You were very limited. You had no other moves, okay? You couldn't shoot the basketball. You rebounded, you dunked. You had a spin move, you got behind the defense, you caught alley-oop dunks. That's what you were. It's not Jokic's fault that you didn't score on threes. You couldn't shoot them. Jokic could. Dwight Howard, I'm looking at the number. I want to make sure my number is right here. In terms of threes, okay, Dwight Howard made 22 threes in his career. Jokic now stands at 593. Dwight Howard has averaged over 20 points a game 4 times in his career. Jokic has averaged 20 points a game the last 3 years and 4 the last 5. Jokic is prolific offensively, inside and out, post game, mid-range game, outside game, okay? Not to mention the fact that his passing ability, 25.7 assists, only 2 seasons in NBA history where a center has averaged those statistics. Both of them were Jokic. Stop. When you say stuff like that, Dwight Howard, people think you should be drug tested. People think you should be drug tested. You should stop. You should stop at, I was a great defensive player. I was very formidable. I was good enough to lead the Orlando Magic to a championship and good enough to help the Lakers win a championship in the bubble. Don't go there with Jokic. You lost already.
Okay, Stephen A. You know, you are your usual bombastic self in this one. And here's the thing. I don't think necessarily that what Dwight Howard had to say was as ridiculous as it may seem to many on their face, right? And quick side note, I find it interesting that, of course, we are doing what we tend to normally do, and we're taking the hot part of the quote, and we're using that as cannon fodder to jump off, but we're also not giving the entirety of the quote. So after he made this commentary on what he was doing with 2s and not 3s, and you know, how great he feels he was in his era, that's Dwight Howard. He also went on to say, and I want to make sure I get this, quote, "I love Jokic and I'm happy for him. I think he's one of the best centers that ever played the game of basketball, but I'm not going to throw dirt on my own name. I'm Dwight Howard. I know what I've done in this league," unquote. And so we have to make sure that we give the entirety of these things, right? And so people look at it and say, oh man, Dwight Howard is taking shots at Jokic. Well, no. He just explained that, but of course, you know, we got to get the hot part, right? If it bleeds, it leads. That's kind of the journalistic saying, and so, you know, you got to get the part that's the hook that catches people's attention. But anyway, so let's look at this, right? Dwight Howard does make some valid points when he's saying he had super dominant games and he's only doing it with 2s and lobs. Now, he also says he's not getting a lot of post-up attempts like Jokic, and that is true. However, and this is one of the things that I always got on him about, even back in the day when he was in his prime, the reason he wasn't getting a lot of post-up attempts like Jokic is because, in all honesty, he didn't have a great post-up game. He didn't have moves. Like, we can look at Jokic, and while I've said before, he's obviously not Hakeem Olajuwon, he's not Kevin McHale, he has a number of moves that he can go to on the low block. Dwight Howard didn't have that. He was pretty stiff and robotic, right? Dwight Howard had a reliable jump hook. Obviously, he's going to get you a lot of dunks and putbacks, and like he said, he's getting a lot of lobs. But that's the reason that people didn't say, okay, Dwight Howard, go set up on the block and we'll get you these post-ups, because he didn't have the skill set to do it, right? Now, the reason that people are raving about Jokic, obviously, is his complete offensive toolkit, right? He can shoot the 3, he can shoot the free throw, he can shoot the mid-range, he has the post moves and the post games for this era, right? And Dwight Howard didn't have most of that. So, like we heard Stephen A say, I think Dwight Howard made what did Stephen A say? 22 3-pointers for his career, and Jokic is already at almost 600. So again, obviously it's a different era, and Dwight did say that in his quote. So he likely wasn't getting the opportunity to be out there shooting 3s anyway. But back to it, he also couldn't shoot them like Jokic. Now, I'm not going to denigrate Dwight Howard's game versus what Jokic can do. Obviously, Jokic came from a completely different culture in terms of the way he's trained as a basketball player and having a more complete skill set. We know that the Europeans raise their players in a very different way than they do here in America, where in America, the game is often predicated so much more on athleticism than complete skill set. But Dwight Howard in his prime, and this is what he mentions, in his prime, right? He's not saying overall, because the problem is during the second half of his career, injuries took over and he started moving around different teams and whatnot. And Dwight Howard was honestly kind of regarded as a clown because he didn't seem to take the game seriously. He didn't have the killer mindset, right? Now, Shaquille O'Neal is one of the most outgoing, gregarious type of guys that ever played in the NBA. But between those lines, he wanted to destroy you. And I think that was kind of the difference between him and Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard did not have the mindset that he wanted to destroy you every night. Like Giannis is another one like that. Like after the games, he's on the podium and he's being interviewed and he's got his book of corny dad jokes and he's being silly in commercials and all that. But between the lines, you see his face. He wants to go out there and demolish people. And we really didn't feel that from Dwight Howard, right? Even a guy like Magic Johnson, who always had a smile, etc., you knew he wanted to kill you. So I think that's probably part of the problem with Dwight Howard, is that people didn't see him as a guy who was really going out there to do damage and destroy people. But Dwight Howard, let's look at his 5-year prime. I'll say that's between the 2007-2008 season and the 2011-2012 season. He averages 20.6 points per game, 2.5 blocks per game, 14 rebounds, 13.9, we'll make it 14, and 59% from the floor. So here's the thing, right? I always get on him. I've always gotten on him when they talk about how great of a defensive player he was. And I said, well, this is a guy who never blocked 3 blocks a game, right? All the other great defensive centers have done that. But here's the thing, right? Now I'm looking back, I can't really hold that against him too much because his prime was right in the middle of the explosion of the 3-point era. So there were a lot less opportunities at the rim to get the block shots. Guys were pulling up, and we see it all the time now. I talk about it constantly. You got guys pulling up in transition to shoot threes. Most of the half-court offense is predicated on trying to get an open look at 3. So can we really denigrate him for not having 3 blocks per game? Probably not, because that's just not the way the game is played anymore. You look at a guy like Rudy Gobert. I just pulled up his numbers. His top shot blocking season is 2.7 blocks per game, and they call this guy the Stifle Tower, and he's another multiple-time defensive player of the year. So when you look at it, you say, oh man, this guy is an elite shot blocker. He's never averaged 3 blocks per game, right? Not like Ewing, not like Olajuwon, not like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, not like Mark Eaton, not like David Robinson, not like Mount Mutombo, not like Alonzo Mourning, not like Ben Wallace. Different era back then, though. These guys were getting more opportunities because guys were coming to the basket more. They weren't shooting as many threes back then. So I had to reassess that myself in terms of how I evaluated the shot blocking numbers and how they played into him being a dominant defender. But if you look at, like I said, that 5-year stretch, he's averaging, 2.6 blocks per game. But now you look at Jokic, for his career, he blocks less than 1 block per game. So there's no question about it that Dwight Howard is the more athletic, the more physical, the better defender, overall the better rebounder. Although I will say Jokic's top rebounding season, not this past season, but the season before he won MVP, he averages 27 points per game and 13.8 rebounds per game. So he almost had one 14 rebound per game season, but Dwight Howard was doing that over a 5-year stretch. So I get what Dwight Howard is saying, but the problem is no one's going to see Dwight Howard getting the ball from the inbounder, dribbling it up the floor, and initiating offense. No one is going to see Dwight Howard getting it at the elbow or at the top of the circle, making things happen, passing the ball, or pulling up for the jumper. No one is going to see Dwight Howard consistently knocking down the triple. No one is seeing Dwight Howard consistently getting triple doubles. Now, if you want to talk about who was more dominant, okay, I get it. If you want to talk about in their prime, could Dwight Howard have competed? I think he probably would lock up Jokic. I do. Again, it comes down to Jokic is great. He has an outstanding skill set. He can do a lot of things, but how many truly great defensive centers, elite defensive centers, are we seeing in the modern NBA that are going to give this guy problems? So, there's that. And then, of course, we talked about it before. Where is the coaching to try and make things more difficult on Jokic? I'm not saying Jokic doesn't have a skill set and an ability to do the things he's doing, but you got to make it hard on him. And it seems like they're allowing it to be easy. But so we're saying Dwight Howard, people are acting like he is crazy because he's standing up for his own career and the things that he did in his prime. I don't think we should. It's not it's not that far-fetched. I don't think it's that disrespectful for him to say that he takes himself in his prime, because to his point, like he said, he knows what he did in this league. I heard Chris Broussard and Rob Parker on The Odd Couple the other night. They were kind of getting into this particular quote Dwight Howard said, and one of the things that they got on him for, they said his career high in scoring is 22.9 points per game. Now that same season, he averaged 14 rebounds per game. He was dominant. He's 59% from the field for his career. But then you look at Jokic, again, different era, more opportunities. He is a better shooter, so having a more well-rounded and more evolved offensive game will generally allow you to score more points. But Jokic has averaged, in the last 3 years alone, he's averaged 26, 27, and then 24 and a half this past year, leading to a championship. So yes, Jokic is the better scorer, but if you would put these guys against each other in their prime, I think Jokic would get it handed to him, just like Embiid handed it to him. But now you look at it and you say, okay, Embiid handed it to him. Where's Embiid and where's Jokic, right? Jokic is the Finals MVP, and Embiid is still trying to figure it out. So I guess it's all how you look at it. But you know, it's I don't know. I think that Dwight Howard should probably get more credit than he's getting, and I don't think we should be going in on him the way we are, because if you look at it a little more in depth there and apply some context just outside the numbers, there is some room for his perspective. Now, of course, his perspective is skewed because we're always going to root for ourselves in most cases, but I don't think the gap is as big as a lot of people realize. Final notes before I get out of here. Dwight Howard's career high in points is 45. His career high in rebounds is 30. His career high in blocks is 10. Now his career high in assists is 7. His career high in steals is 5. So obviously we know he's nowhere near the passer that Jokic is. But at his athletic peak, he was an absolute monster. Now, with that said, Jokic's career high in points is superior, 50. His career high in rebounds is almost right there, 27. His career high in assists, 18. Career high in steals is 7. Career high in blocks is 5. So their career highs pretty much mirror each other, but prime for prime, especially if they're matching up head to head. If it's a head-to-head matchup, prime for prime, and who knows if Jokic is even in his prime yet, because he's still pretty young in the game. I think he just finished his 6th season, so he might be getting into that. But prime for prime, if they're matching up head-to-head, I think Dwight Howard would lock him up. But at the same time, prime for prime, I think Jokic is a little better due to his more complete offensive skill set. But that's also, that's subjective, because if you're someone who values defense a little more, maybe you take Dwight Howard. Anyway, what I want to know from you is, what do you think of Dwight Howard's comments? Do you think he's completely crazy? Do you think he should stay off the weed, as Stephen A. Smith says? Do you think he's on the weed for saying what he said? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Go ahead, leave your comments in the comment section. I'll get back with you next episode, and I'm out. Peace.